Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout would be the park's dark ride drop tower that would be designed by the Otis Elevator Company. With the ride system and structure, the ride would originally open in 2004 to the theme of the Hollywood Tower Hotel after the success of the Floridan version 10 years prior. However, the theme, atmosphere, and drop sequence would be modified after 2017's reimagining based on the Guardians of the Galaxy IP, with mixed results from guests about the re-theme, depending on what theme or drop profile they would preferred. So the question is, what are my thoughts about this ride specifically? Well, we'll get there shortly. But first, I'd like to cover my association with the ride, along with my thoughts on Guardians' predecessor, the Tower of Terror, and some brief history mixed in. For the people who may have not been familiar with the predecessor of Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, Tower of Terror would be a ride subtly influenced by the 1960s show, The Twilight Zone. Out of the many installations of the ride, this would be the second out of the 5 drop towers designed by the Otis Elevator Company, along with the second out of the 3 to hold the Hollywood hotel theme, with the original theme that what the Californian version held up until January 2nd, 2017, the Paris version up until its 2019 refurbishment, and the Floridan version that still holds the Twilight Zone theme to this day. The ride would be placed in an abandoned 1930s hotel located in Hollywood, California, where guests are transported into the Twilight Zone setting unwillingly once inside the library pre-show. Here, the guest hotel elevators would be out of operation for many decades based on a struck of lightning vanishing a part of the hotel and killing 5 passengers on October 31st, 1939. There, guests must board a maintenance service elevator located in the boiler room as they're forced into their own episode of the Twilight Zone. Now for myself, I actually find this to be the first ride I've ever gotten interested in prior to riding for a long period of time. You see, from 2011 to 2019, I would be pretty intrigued into the general mechanics of elevators. How an elevator propelled a car up and down to another level while pushing some buttons that would trigger events caught my attention. While the mechanics of elevators wouldn't be as thorough as roller coasters nowadays, I would still be pretty interested in them. Additionally, while I was younger, I also watched many elevator related videos, including an elevator channel called Diesel Doozy. Actually, my Roblox account back in 2017 would originate its name with the account of Diesel Doozy 4th, from how much of a fan I was. However, I would usually refer nowadays to just Diesel for myself, for less confusion on who is who, while keeping my brand consistent with hinting the Diesel name, which is really more fitting for myself. Additionally, while introducing me to an actual thrill ride, I would also be introduced to a more stylistic and chill theme that I would subtly equip for a style, which I still enjoy to this day. Likely due to a more unique theme and style that many other rides usually don't hold, especially with the US. This could have been one of the contributing factors to why the ride gained a massive following, along with the fact that the drop tower concept of being more dynamic on theming and thrills compared to other drop towers, while staying similar in thrill level to the larger drop towers. However, in 2016, there was discussion on the Marvel re-theme of the drop tower, and negative pushback from the announcement based on either the emotions on the Tower of Terror theme being taken from the California location, and or the fact that Disney would be implementing an unnecessary Marvel re-theme, especially at the time where Avengers Campus wouldn't really exist in the park, and the theme would still be a part of Hollywood, California. This would be the reason as to why I would ride the California version of Tower of Terror, on November 15, 2016 due to the announcement of the closure. The exterior of the tower was underneath scaffolding for the marble re-theme. Now, in terms of my brief thoughts on the attraction, while I didn't remember the specific forces on ride, as I wouldn't consider the forces to be important to remember at age 7, I would say that the ride wasn't going to be as extreme as I thought and exaggerated in my mind when approaching the attraction in person, based by the height of the ride standing 130 feet at the tallest door, and thus would show intimidation. Interestingly, a coincidence happened when I would be completely void of height after riding Wonder Woman Flight of Courage, which would be 131 feet tall. So a foot difference definitely happened. Then the show scenes, even though it was minimal and didn't embrace much of the spooky hotel, still kept the vibe and ambiance of the ride, along with the anticipation for the elevator drop. Interestingly, this specific combination of sequencing of the drops and scenes of the ride would become extinct after Tower of Terror at the California location and its clone in Paris would get their refurbishment that would implement a more thrilling drop sequence. Although the Paris one only had the ride show scenes and drop sequence changed. Therefore, the only way to try and compare it to the California experience, you must combine the exterior and queue of the Paris version plus the hallway scene from the Florida version and change the decoration around for the mirror scene, along with including the entire drop sequence of the normal Tokyo version without shoulder straps. Anyways, fast forward to May of 2017 and the new look of the attraction was present, along with the influence of a new story was present with the new IP, which was planned to release around the same month as the Guardians of the Galaxy 2 movie would release, really. Maybe before the ride opened, but the perception could feel clear about being marketing for the franchise. But at the same time, there was hope as the legendary designer Joe Rohde would be head designer of the attraction, with some of the most legendary attractions in the company, like Expedition Everest at Disney's Animal Kingdom, the Land at Pandora at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and the unique theme of the aforementioned Tower of Terror at Tokyo Disney Sea in his catalog. Additionally, in interviews, he would mention that the franchise would be more lighthearted and chaotic theme, and wanted to create both the scenes of the queue to the IP and the drop sequence to be more fun and thrilling to feel that a dopamine of happiness the forces for the ride system gives. So, what is the experience like?
My dear friends, this is the moment you have been waiting for.
Starting off with the appearance, the ride accompanies this large building that holds a mix of red, orange, and yellow color schemes, accompanied by metal props and shapes that were surrounding the building. Now, likely, the retheme probably couldn't modify the current building in terms of structure, as the project would probably require much more inspection money and could have been a possibility of making the building worse in either aesthetically or physically. And while most changes were utilized well, I would say that the building looks overwhelming with the colors and pipes surrounding the top half, along with the fact that the ride is the tallest structure at the Disneyland resort. So lands that don't have obstructed views, that's going to be the distraction of Guardians, could potentially put off by the appearance of the building, such as Radiator Springs, Arizona. Now, while the rider might not be detracted by the appearance of to the ride, I'll say that this could look unappealing at some angles, and my only true critique in terms of flaws. Once entering the main building, we enter Tilvian's Empire for a tour around the area, filled with a variety of his collections of many physical props for creatures, including a video screen of Tilvian interacting with the Guardians itself. Then the hand scanning technique for humans is introduced to enter to the collector's private office, as the few humans likely interacted with the collection in terms of in-universe reason. This holds the ride's pre-show, where Rocket introduces that he's luckily escaped, but still needs help rescuing or releasing his friends by accessing the gantry lift that leads to the control system for the cages, by using the human hand identification to enter the gantry lift. There you'll load into one of 6 gantry lifts and try to watch the chaos as the ride goes. Now, in terms of most of the queue, with the setting paints the picture of being inside a small portion of Tavillion's collection, and what character he is from what little information we're given. Additionally, while I'll normally critique the story for being extremely simple, I'll say it's quite effective when the ride comes into play. I'll say that the references in detail in the loading area are smaller changes from the boiler room of the Tower of Terror compared to the rest of the queue. And while not a big issue in terms of story, I could wish that some of the boiler room was changed to present more of the collection. Even though they already do that, it still kind of feels like a boiler room, really. Also, before heading into the attraction, I'd like to talk about the capacity and vehicles before talking about the ride experience. First, in terms of line configuration, the ride holds 2 types of queues, being a less controllable queue before the pre-show, with a 2-minute pre-show that follows, and then the loading queue that can be more controlled. Additionally, the ride holds 6 elevator cars of 24, with a max of 3 of the 6 can run simultaneously, assuming we have full capacity. While the other 3 could load after 2 and 1/4 of a minute of ride time. In theory, the ride can have a pretty high capacity of riders if all 6 elevator cars are utilized. Usually 2/3 of the maximum capacity is utilized, but the ride can still have a high capacity still. However, despite the capacity, the ride could get one of the longest waits in the park, likely exceeding the 90-minute wait on the average days, but could fluctuate the wait and even exceed 90 minutes depending on what days families could more easily access the park, being weekends, holidays, or school breaks. Additionally, despite riding in a metal box, seat backs and seat cushions feel comfortable, along with the lap seatbelt feeling comfortable while exposed, which is going to be an important on-ride factor for the ride's forces. Now, when it comes to the ride experience, the star of the attraction is less on the atmosphere of theming and more so focused on the thrill ride experience. You see, unlike the Tower of Terror, Guardians of the Galaxy spends a lot more time speeding up and down the elevator shaft, as very few moments of the ride ever have a slow moment, and usually being prioritized for show scenes, which are very brief and aren't overly important to remember for the story, as most of the queue already has covered most of the story, and we're just following up the plan for Rocket to do some chaos. Anyways, in terms of thrills, the ride, whenever there's a descent, gives strong floor airtime and force thanks to the cable drum underneath and the lap seat belt as your restraint. The longer the descent, the more sustained airtime. This, plus the quantity of moments for descent for over 2 minutes, would give more moments over any other drop tower to be my favorite. As well, yes, there are more intense drop towers, including myself riding Tower of Doom at Elitch Gardens. The ride offers so much variety of 4 types of descents and airtime with the long experience. The descents can come in fully stopped drops or the quick switch from ascending to descending. Now, while I find this to be my favorite drop tower profile, I would say that I think the ride could be better if positive forces could have been added when ascending. Now, I get that probably the mechanics of the ride likely might have not allowed this, as rather than magnetic brakes of where positives coincidentally gets created, the ride uses elevator cables and larger elevator drums to move the elevator. So those are not as strong to produce these stronger forces. But in terms of drop tower thrills, I would have said that the positives would have been a welcome inclusion in terms of thrills. Additionally, while the story isn't really present, I like that the concept of hijacking the elevator was followed through with the first scene of being elevator backing out of the station, and the first scene we witnessed. And the rest of the time is really bonus content that still relates to the cause of the cage hijack, which aren't plot heavy and are brief. Overall, I was impressed with the ride, as even though I was familiar with the ride's plot beforehand, I had no expectations for the forces of the ride, even though I've ridden an adult drop tower beforehand. The forces in sequence alone would have put this as my favorite drop tower, but while low on content for the story and kind of cliche concept of rescuing whatever the blank is, still had a seamless and effective presentation of the story to get onto the ride, along with a different take of the story, so there's some effort in that area at least. I'm hoping that any drop sequences modified or created after Guardians by Otis would be attempted well like this ride, as I've heard as from the Paris modification, while weaker looking story in comparison could potentially have the better drop sequence, while the Spider-Man drop tower going to Hong Kong's Disneyland could potentially have a remodified tower or drop sequence, since the last physical tower built was a clone of California's tower to Paris in 2008, and the successor of Guardians would start in 2017. Anyways, tune in into next episode where we discuss my favorite traveling coaster model, at least from the ones I've ridden.